At my daughter's engagement dinner in Charleston's finest restaurant, my future son-in-law looked at my faded flannel shirt and muddy boots, then sneered. "Honestly, you smell like you walked straight out of a hog pen." My daughter lowered her eyes, but I held his gaze and replied, "I've spent 40 years smelling like honest work. There's a difference between a man who smells like a hog pen and a man who acts like one." Then he seated me beside the kitchen, unaware that I owned the restaurant. "I'm grateful you're here with me tonight. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your city, your country. I'd love to know." Some names and details in this story have been changed or fictionalized for storytelling purposes. The lesson, however, is one I believe is worth carrying. The alarm never went off at 4:30. It didn't need to. After 40 years of farming, my body had learned to wake before the sun did, as if the land itself was calling me back to work. I lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling of the old farmhouse. The wood above me had darkened with age, the same ceiling I had stared at the morning after Margaret passed, the same ceiling I had stared at the night Rebecca called to tell me she was engaged. Different feelings. Same ceiling. Duke scratched at the bedroom door, one long drag of his paw, then two short taps. His version of a good morning. "Coming, old boy?" I pulled on my flannel shirt, the blue one faded at the elbows, soft from years of washing. My Wrangler jeans. My work boots, the brown ones with dried red clay still caught in the treads from yesterday's walk along the eastern fence line. I didn't clean them. I thought about it. Then I decided not to. In the kitchen, I poured coffee and stood at the window. The sun was just beginning to push orange light across the cornfields, 2,800 acres of Carolina red clay, stretching out in every direction. The same land my father had left me, the same land I had expanded acre by acre over 4 decades. Gaines Harvest Company, 3 processing facilities, 40 restaurant chains across the southeast. None of that was visible from this window. From this window, it just looked like home. I opened the nightstand drawer before leaving. I don't know exactly why, habit maybe, or something closer to need. The photograph was where it always was. Rebecca at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders out in the east field, both of us squinting into the afternoon sun, her gap-toothed smile wide enough to swallow the whole frame. I stood there holding it longer than I meant to. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into the chest pocket of my flannel shirt right over my heart. Duke walked me to the truck. I scratched behind his ears at the gate. "Don't wait up," I told him. He wagged his tail anyway. The drive from Orangeburg County to Charleston took 90 minutes on a good day. I knew every curve of that highway, had driven it 1,000 times, hauling produce, hauling equipment, hauling whatever the farm needed. Tonight I was driving it in a shirt with clay on the boots and a photograph in my pocket, headed to the finest restaurant in the city. The 1832 Grill sat at the edge of the historic district, its entrance flanked by gas lanterns that threw warm gold light across the cobblestone. A valet in a white jacket stepped forward as I pulled the old F-150 up to the curb. He looked at the truck, then at my boots, then back at the truck. "Good evening, sir," he said carefully. "Evening." I handed him the keys. Inside, the restaurant hummed with the kind of quiet that costs money, low jazz, the soft clink of crystal conversation held just below full volume. The smell of browned butter and fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen. I stood in the entrance and let my eyes adjust to the warm light. Rebecca saw me first. "Daddy!" She crossed the lobby in 3 quick steps and wrapped her arms around me, and for one solid moment everything else disappeared. She smelled like the perfume Margaret used to buy her for Christmas. Her arms held tight. "You made it," she said into my shoulder. "Told you I would, baby girl." When she stepped back, her eyes were bright, but they moved quickly, checking somewhere over my shoulder. That was when I saw him. Tyler Bowen stood 6 feet away in a charcoal Armani suit, a Rolex catching the chandelier, light his Oxford shoes polished to a mirror shine. He was 33 years old and looked like a man who had never once been uncomfortable in his life. He looked at me the way people look at something they didn't order and aren't sure how to send back. "Sir." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I say this with complete respect. This is a 5-star establishment. Your attire may make some of our other guests uncomfortable this evening." My chest tightened, not with anger, but with something slower and heavier. I looked at him for a long moment. "Son," I said, keeping my voice level. "I've been wearing this shirt since before you knew what 5-star meant." Tyler's jaw shifted. He stepped slightly closer and dropped his voice. Honestly, you smell like you walked straight out of a hog pen. I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm just being honest with you." Rebecca's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with something between horror and desperation. "Tyler, please," she started. "Rebecca." His tone cut her off clean as a knife edge. "I'm handling it." The tightness in my chest spread. I looked at my daughter, at the way she pulled her hand back, at the way her eyes dropped to the floor, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Grief. I kept my voice steady. "Son, I've spent 40 years in places that smell like honest work. I've never once been ashamed of it." I held his gaze. "I hope one day you'll understand the difference between a man who smells like a hog pen and a man who acts like one." Tyler's expression hardened. He straightened his cufflinks slowly, deliberately, a man reasserting control. "Rebecca," he said without looking at her. "I already called ahead. They'll seat him separately." He turned and walked back toward the dining room. Rebecca looked at me, her eyes full, her chin trembling, her mouth opening and closing without sound. I touched her arm gently. "Go ahead, baby girl," I said. "I'll find my seat." The table they gave me was beside the kitchen door. Not near it. Beside it. Every time a server pushed through, a gust of warm air carrying dish soap and grease rolled out. The clatter of plates and the sharp bark of a line cook calling an order punctuated the soft jazz playing everywhere else in the room. A white linen tablecloth had been laid over it, someone's attempt at dignity, but the location said everything the linen tried to take back. I pulled out the chair and sat down. From here I could see everything. Tyler and Rebecca's table was across the room by the window that overlooked the Charleston Harbor, the best table in the house. Candlelight flickering across crystal glasses. The city lights smeared gold across the water behind them. Tyler had ordered wine already. He swirled the glass and said something that made Rebecca nod, though her eyes kept cutting toward my corner. A young man in a white server's jacket appeared at my elbow. "Good evening, sir. I'm Marcus. I'll be taking care of you tonight." He was maybe 24, with a steady voice and careful eyes, the kind of young man who paid attention. "Can I start you with something to drink? Coffee, please, black." "Of course." He didn't move right away. His gaze traveled briefly across the room to Tyler's table, then back to me. "Sir, I want you to know you're welcome to sit anywhere in the dining room that's open. You don't have to stay in this spot." I looked up at him. "You always offer that to your guests." "Not always," he admitted. "But I'm offering it to you." "I appreciate that, son. But I think I'll stay right here." I glanced toward Tyler's table. Best seat in the house for watching people. Marcus nodded like that made perfect sense and went to get my coffee. Rebecca came over 7 minutes later. I counted not because I was keeping score, but because I was watching the clock the way a man watches weather when he knows something is coming. She moved quickly, sliding into the chair across from me and leaning forward on her elbows, her voice low and tight. "Daddy, I am so sorry." He didn't mean it the way it came out. He's been under a lot of pressure with work, and tonight matters to him and… "Rebecca." I set my hands flat on the table. "Baby girl, stop." She stopped. Her eyes were red at the corners. "He called ahead," I said quietly, "to put me at this table before tonight even started." Her face went pale. "What? He told me in the lobby? Said he'd already arranged it." "Daddy, I didn't know." Her voice cracked clean down the middle. "I swear I didn't know he did that." "I believe you. I'll talk to him. I'll make him move you. You'll do no such thing." I reached across and covered her hand with mine. My hands were rough, the knuckles thick, the skin darkened from decades of weather. Hers were soft and smooth and shaking slightly. "I need you to go back to that table and let tonight be what it's going to be. Can you do that for me?" "Daddy, Rebecca." I kept my voice gentle but firm, the same voice I'd used when she was 8 years old and terrified of a thunderstorm. "Trust me. Okay?" She pressed her lips together. Her chin was trembling, and she was fighting the tears the way her mother used to fight them, jaw-tight eyes, wide, blinking fast. "Okay," she whispered. She stood up. She smoothed her dress with both hands, a gesture so much like Margaret that my heart seized for a full second, and walked back across the restaurant toward Tyler, who watched her return with his arms stretched across the back of her chair, like a man marking territory. Marcus brought my coffee. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the warmth work into my palms. From Tyler's table, his voice carried, not shouted, just pitched, with the casual confidence of someone who never worried about being overheard. "I genuinely don't understand why he couldn't just change his clothes. We're celebrating an engagement, not a county fair." Rebecca murmured something I couldn't catch. I'm saying what everyone here is thinking," Tyler said. "It's not wrong to have standards, Rebecca." My jaw tightened. I reached into my chest pocket and touched the edge of the photograph, Rebecca at 8 laughing in the field. I pressed my thumb against the corner of it and breathed. Marcus appeared at my shoulder again, quiet as a shadow. "Sir," he said low enough for just me. "For what it's worth, Ms. Denton, our senior manager, told every member of staff tonight that whatever you need, we make it happen. No questions asked." I looked up at him. "Carol said that before service started, word for word." I nodded slowly. "How old are you, Marcus?" 24. I'm working my way through Charleston Southern, hospitality management." "Keep going," I said. "Don't stop." He gave me a small, serious nod and stepped away. I looked down at my coffee. The kitchen door swung open again, another wave of heat and noise, and then swung shut. Somewhere across the restaurant, Tyler laughed at something, one of his own jokes, and the sound of it moved through me like a cold draft through an old wall. Then the front door of the 1832 grill opened, and the sound of high heels on hardwood cut through the jazz, sharp and deliberate. I raised my eyes. The woman in the fur coat had arrived. She moved through the restaurant, the way certain women move through rooms they've decided belong to them. Chin lifted, shoulders, back eyes sweeping left and right, like she was taking inventory of everything and everyone and finding most of it just barely acceptable. Sandra Bowen was 58 years old and dressed like she wanted everyone to know it cost something. The fur coat was cream-colored and fell to her knees. Pearl earrings, hair the color of winter frost, set in a way that didn't move. She spotted Tyler immediately, and her whole face shifted, warmth flooding in like sun through a cracked window. "There he is," She crossed to him and pressed both his cheeks between her palms like he was still 12 years old. "You look wonderful, sweetheart." Tyler beamed. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from him all evening. Rebecca stood to greet her. Sandra accepted the hug, briefly patted her once on the back, and released her. Then her eyes began their slow tour of the room until they landed on me at the table by the kitchen door. Her expression didn't change. That was the remarkable thing. No surprise, no flicker of discomfort. She simply noted me the way you note a piece of furniture that's been left in an inconvenient place. She said something to Tyler. He responded. She nodded once, set her coat on the back of her chair, and began walking toward me. I set down my coffee mug. She stopped at the edge of my table and looked down at me with a smile so controlled it could have been painted on. "Mr. Gaines, I presume." Her voice was smooth as Riverstone. "I'm Sandra Bowen, Tyler's mother. I just want to say we hold absolutely nothing against your profession. Everyone contributes in their own way." That's generous of you, Mrs. Bowen." "Of course." She folded her hands in front of her. "I do think, however, and I say this only out of consideration for Rebecca, that an occasion of this nature might have called for somewhat more appropriate presentation. A hotel nearby could have provided you a room to freshen up beforehand. The staff here could arrange something discreet going forward, something that accounts for your comfort level." I looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Bowen," I said, "in 40 years of running a farm, I've learned one thing about people who worry about where others sit and how they smell." I kept my voice even unhurried. "They're usually the ones least comfortable with who they are." Sandra's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes went cold. "I'm only thinking of the evening," she said. "I know you are." She turned without another word and walked back across the restaurant, her heels clicking a precise measured rhythm on the hardwood floor. At Tyler's table, she leaned down and said something in his ear. He looked over at me. Then he nodded. 30 seconds later, Sandra raised 2 fingers toward the nearest server. Not Marcus, a different one, younger, visibly nervous. She pointed toward my table, then toward the far wall, where a narrow service corridor ran alongside the kitchen entrance. "I'd like to speak with your manager," she announced loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "This seating arrangement needs to be corrected." Carol Denton appeared from across the room in under a minute. She was 40 years old, trim, with a posture that didn't bend easily. She walked to Sandra's side, not mine, professionally correct, and said with the particular calmness of someone who had prepared for exactly this. "Good evening, Mrs. Bowen. I'm Carol Denton, Senior Manager. How can I help you?" Sandra smiled her painted smile. "This gentleman by the kitchen, he'd be more comfortable somewhere less central, perhaps near the service corridor, more private, less disruptive to the other guests." Carol turned and looked at me. Our eyes met for just a beat. "Mr. Gaines is seated where he chose to sit," Carol said. "We're happy to accommodate him anywhere in the restaurant he prefers." Sandra's smile thinned. "I'm not sure you understand the situation." "I understand it clearly, Mrs. Bowen." Carol's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Mr. Gaines is our guest, as are you. Both of you will be treated with complete respect this evening." Sandra's jaw tightened. 2 small spots of color appeared high on her cheekbones. "Do you know who I am?" "I do," Carol said simply. "And I know who he is." The silence between them lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Sandra turned away, smoothing the front of her dress with one sharp motion, and returned to her table. Tyler watched her settle into her chair. He asked her something quietly. She shook her head once. I exhaled slowly through my nose. Marcus materialized at my elbow with a quiet efficiency that I'd come to appreciate in the last 30 minutes. "Fresh coffee, Mr. Gaines." "Please," he poured. His hand was steady. As he set the carafe down, he said without looking up, "Ms. Denton has worked here 11 years. I've never seen her speak to a guest like that." A pause. She meant every word. "I know she did," I said. I watched Sandra across the room, now absorbed in conversation with Tyler. Her composure rebuilt brick by brick. Rebecca sat beside Tyler, her hands in her lap, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. She hadn't looked at me since coming back from our conversation. I reached into my chest pocket and pressed my thumb against the edge of the photograph. Rebecca at 8, laughing in the field. Nothing complicated about that girl. Nothing calculated. I wondered where she'd gone. Then the front door opened again, and this time the man who walked in wasn't alone. He had 3 other men with him, all of them in dark suits, all of them carrying the particular posture of people accustomed to making decisions that affected other people's lives. Frank Bowen had arrived, and he was smiling. Frank Bowen filled a room differently than his wife did. Sandra entered spaces like she owned them. Frank entered them like he was in the process of buying them. He was 60 years old, broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed back from a wide forehead and the kind of permanent tan that came from golf courses rather than farm fields. His handshake, I could tell from across the room, was the practiced kind firm 2 pumps eye contact held precisely long enough to signal confidence without tipping into aggression. The 3 men with him were younger, all of them in dark suits, all of them carrying leather portfolios. Business partners. I noted the portfolios. Nobody brings paperwork to a family dinner. Frank spotted Tyler, crossed to him, clapped him on the shoulder with real warmth. He shook Rebecca's hand, not a hug, a handshake, which told me something about how he saw her, and then his eyes made their circuit of the room until they reached my corner. He looked at me the way a developer looks at land, assessing, calculating square footage. Then he smiled, said something to Tyler, and turned back to his partners. I picked up my coffee. That was when Rebecca came back. She didn't move quickly this time. She walked across the restaurant slowly, deliberately, like a woman who had made a decision and was still making peace with it. She sat down across from me and pressed both palms flat on the table, and I could see that her hands were trembling. "Daddy." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." "I'm listening. Before we came tonight, Tyler told me that if the evening went well, he wanted to talk to you about the farm, about selling some of the land." She swallowed hard. "He said farming wasn't a sustainable long-term asset." Those were his words. Sustainable long-term asset. Something moved through my chest. Not anger. Something quieter and more permanent. "Did he?" I said. "I told him it wasn't his place to—" She stopped. Her chin was trembling. "I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her the way you look at someone when you're trying to memorize their face before something changes. She had Margaret's eyes. The same shape, the same dark amber color, the same way they went glassy right before she cried, but refused to. "Fingirl." I said, "Do you remember the winter you were 12? When your mama was in the hospital the first time?" Rebecca's breath caught. "Daddy, do you remember what she made you promise her that last night before the second surgery?" The tears Rebecca had been holding back for the past hour finally broke through, not dramatically, not with sobs, just 2 lines running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe. "She made me promise to always protect you," she whispered. That's right. I know." Her voice cracked. I know I haven't been doing that tonight. I reached across and covered her hands with mine. Your mama was the strongest woman I ever knew. She lay in that hospital bed scared half out of her mind, and what she was worried about was you. Making sure you had a promise to hold on to. Something to guide you when she couldn't. Rebecca pressed her lips together. A small sound escaped her that she immediately swallowed. She passed 3 days later. I continued. January 14th. The fields were frozen solid. I remember standing at the kitchen window the morning after and thinking, I don't know how to do this alone. 40 years of knowing how to work land, and I didn't know how to make breakfast for a 12-year-old girl without her mother telling me how. You figured it out? Rebecca said, her voice thick. Hush, I figured it out. I squeezed her hands. Because you needed me to. That's what parents do, baby girl. They figure it out. Across the room, I heard Frank's voice rise briefly in laughter at something one of his partners said. Rebecca flinched at the sound. His company wants my land, I said quietly. The eastern border section, 1,200 acres. They filed a zoning application 14 months ago, before Tyler proposed to you. Rebecca's face went still. What, Bowen Property Group. Orangeburg County Development Project. My lawyer found the filing 2 weeks ago. I kept my voice level. I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what tonight actually is. She stared at me. The amber in her eyes had gone dark. Tyler knew, she asked. I believe he did. Her jaw worked. She looked down at her hands, still under mine, then at the simple diamond on her left ring finger that caught the candlelight. What are you going to do? She asked. Tonight. I leaned back. Nothing yet. I'm going to let things be what they are. I need you to go back to that table, baby girl. And I need you to watch. Not me watch them. Watch how they talk about this family when they think they're winning. Rebecca wiped her face with the back of her hand, in one quick motion, her mother's gesture exact and unsentimental. Okay, she said. You trust me. She looked at me, and for just a moment she was 8 years old again, sitting on my shoulders in the east field, squinting into the Carolina sun. Always, she said. She stood up, squared her shoulders, walked back across the restaurant. I watched her go. Then I slid my hand into my chest pocket, felt the photograph and the small folded envelope I'd been carrying for 12 years, the one with Margaret's handwriting on the front. I hadn't decided yet when to give it to her, but I was getting closer. Rebecca walked back to Tyler's table without looking over her shoulder. I watched her sit down. Tyler said something close to her ear. She nodded once the way you nod when you're agreeing to something you don't entirely believe. He picked up his wine glass. She picked up hers. And just like that, from across the restaurant, they looked like any other young couple celebrating something good. I turned back to my coffee. It had gone cold. The kitchen door swung open behind me, a burst of heat, and the sharp smell of roasting garlic then swung shut again. Marcus appeared and exchanged my cold cup for a fresh one without being asked. I was beginning to appreciate that young man more with every passing minute. I sat with my hands around the warm mug and let the restaurant move around me. A table of 4 near the window toasted something and laughed. The jazz shifted to a slower number. Somewhere behind me, a line cook called out an order in the shorthand language of professional kitchens. I was still sitting there when Carol Denton pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need to. You holding up? She said. 15 years ago, you called me Mr. Gaines when you were nervous, I said. You're doing it again tonight. The corner of her mouth moved. Because tonight I'm nervous for you. Don't be. I've been through harder evenings than this one. I know you have. She folded her hands on the table. I was there for one of them. I looked at her, this woman who had been a frightened 20-year-old, standing at the gate of my farm with a handwritten job application and eyes red from crying. 40 years old now. Steady. In charge of every detail of one of the finest restaurants in South Carolina. Your father still goes to First Baptist on Sundays? I asked. Every week. Front pew. He lights a candle before the service. She paused. He lit one for you last Sunday, actually. Said he had a feeling you might need it soon. James always did have good instincts. Carol reached into the pocket of her jacket and placed a folded piece of paper on the table between us. She smoothed it flat with 2 fingers. 3 weeks ago, Tyler Bowen called to confirm tonight's reservation. He also made a secondary request. She tapped the paper. I wrote it down word for word the way I do with anything that doesn't feel right. He asked that the, and I'm quoting directly, elderly farm worker accompanying the party be seated away from the main dining area, preferably near the service entrance, so as not to make other guests uncomfortable. I looked at the paper. Then I looked up at her. I know, I said. He told Rebecca he'd arranged it. She didn't know beforehand. I didn't think she did. Carol's jaw tightened for just a moment. Mr. Gaines, there's something else. One of my staff recognized Tyler Bowen's name from a courthouse filing. Public record available through the South Carolina Secretary of State's office. Anyone can pull it. She set a second sheet beside the first. It's a UCC-1 financing statement, a public document that records a secured loan. This one was filed 18 months ago by Bowen Consulting, LLC, Tyler's company. The guarantor listed on the filing is Walter R. Gaines. I picked up the second sheet. My name was there. Printed cleanly in the guarantor field, a signature beneath it that was shaped like mine but wasn't. I never signed this, I said. I know. Her voice was quiet and precise. Under South Carolina law, a forged signature on a UCC financing statement constitutes fraud. It's a felony under State Code 161310, carrying up to 10 years. But that's not for tonight. Tonight, I just needed you to see it. I set the paper down. My chest was tight, but my hands were steady. 3 years ago, I said Tyler came to my farm. Said he wanted to start a consulting business. He asked for $80,000. He said he'd have it back to me within 18 months. He said it on Rebecca's name. Carol didn't react with surprise. She'd already known or suspected. Chakitam, I have the bank transfer records, I said. Electronic transfer, March 14, 2022, from the Gaines Farm operating account to Tyler Bowen's personal checking account. $80,000 even. I kept the confirmation the way I keep every financial record in the filing cabinet in the farm office, organized by year. I looked at her. He has repaid $0 in 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. Carol exhaled slowly through her nose. And it's all in the envelope, I said, nodding toward the manila envelope sitting on the far edge of my table where it had been sitting untouched all evening. The bank transfer confirmation, the UCC filing your staff found, and the rest of what a licensed private investigative firm fully certified under South Carolina Code 4018 put together for me over the past 6 months. Public records, voluntary statements from people Tyler trusted. Nothing obtained illegally. Carol looked at the envelope, then at me. What are you waiting for? She asked. I reached into my chest pocket, touched the photograph, touched the small folded envelope beside it. For Rebecca to be ready, I said. Carol nodded slowly. She smoothed her jacket, and looked across the restaurant to where Tyler was leaning back in his chair, laughing at something Frank Bowen had said. Frank's three business partners were leaning in, attentive, the way men lean in when money is being discussed. "One more thing," Carol said quietly. "Those men with Frank Bowen. Two of them are investors in the Orangeburg development project. The third is a commercial real estate attorney." She looked at me. "They didn't come here for the food." "No," I agreed. "They didn't." She left. I picked up my coffee. Across the room, Tyler glanced toward my corner, brief, satisfied, like a man checking that an inconvenient detail was still where he'd left it. I looked right back at him. Then Frank Bowen stood up from the table, buttoned his jacket, and began walking in my direction. Frank Bowen moved through the restaurant with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once arrived somewhere uninvited, because everywhere he went, he decided the invitation was implied. He pulled out the chair Carol had just vacated and sat down without asking. Settled in like he owned the square footage. Unbuttoned his jacket, leaned back, and gave me the kind of smile that costs nothing and means less. "Walter." He said my name like we'd known each other for years. "Frank Bowen, Tyler's father. I apologize for not coming over sooner. The evening got away from me." He extended his hand across the table. I shook it, firm, 2 pumps. He held the eye contact exactly as long as I'd expected. "Good to finally meet you," he said. Likewise, a server appeared. Frank ordered a bourbon without looking at the menu, the kind of order that signals familiarity with good whiskey, and then turned back to me with his full attention, which I suspected was a thing people generally found flattering. "Rebecca talks about this farm of yours," he said. "Orangeburg County. I know that area a little. Good land out there." "It is. How many acres are you working these days?" 2,800. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that number somewhere useful. "That's a serious operation for one man." "I've got good people," I said. "And 40 years of practice," Frank smiled. "Admirable. I mean that genuinely." He paused while the server set his bourbon down, then leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, the body language of a man about to say something he'd rehearsed as casual. "Walter, I'll be straight with you. I'm not a man who enjoys dancing around a subject. It wastes everybody's time." "I respect that." "Schattern? Bowen Property Group has been developing land in Orangeburg County for going on 18 months now. Prime corridor, good infrastructure, strong growth projections, the kind of area that's about to become very valuable very fast." He swirled his bourbon. "Our eastern boundary sits right up against your property line, 1,200 acres of your land specifically. And I'll be honest with you, without that section, our project is significantly limited." "How significantly?" "Suits the difference between a $32 million development and a drawing on paper." He said it plainly, like a man who respected numbers too much to soften them. "I'm not here to pressure you, Walter. I want to be clear about that. But I'd be doing us both a disservice if I didn't say plainly that we'd like to talk about acquisition. After the wedding, family to family. Fair market value plus a 10% family premium. The number we're looking at starts with $8 million. I let that sit for a moment. $8 million, I said. To start. There's room to discuss. I looked at him across the table. Frank Bowen was a careful man, I could see that. Careful about his words, careful about his expression, careful to keep the transaction feeling like generosity rather than what it was. "Frank," I said, "how long ago did your company file the zoning application for the Orangeburg project?" Something moved behind his eyes. Just a flicker there and gone. "These things go through proper channels," he said. "Standard process zoning applications, environmental assessments, the usual. You know how development works." "I do." Zoning applications in South Carolina are public record filed with the county planning office and accessible through the state database. Anyone can pull them. I kept my voice even. Your application for the Orangeburg corridor was filed 14 months ago, before Tyler proposed to Rebecca, before this ring went on my daughter's finger. Frank set his bourbon down. The smile was still there, but it had stopped reaching his eyes. Walter, I'm not accusing you of anything, I said. I'm just noting the timeline, because timelines matter to me. I'm a farmer. Farming is all about what you plant when you plant it and what you expect to grow. Frank was quiet for 3 full seconds, which in a conversation like this one was a long time. This is a business matter, he said finally. Separate from the family side of things entirely. Is it? Completely. I nodded. I picked up my coffee mug, found it empty, and set it back down. Frank, your son, walked into this restaurant tonight and told my daughter's father that he smelled like a hog pen. Your wife suggested I eat near the service entrance. And now you're sitting at my table telling me the land my family has worked for 40 years would be better off as a real estate development. I looked at him steadily. You'll understand if I'm finding it a little difficult to separate the business from the family. Frank's jaw tightened. He recovered quickly, practiced, but I'd seen it. I understand your frustration, he said. And I want to apologize on behalf of— You don't have to apologize for them, I said. They made their choices. What I'm asking is what you actually came to this table to say. Not the preamble. The real question. Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his bourbon and took a slow sip. And the real question, he said, is whether you're a man who lets sentiment get in the way of $8 million. I reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. My fingers touched the photograph, touched the small folded envelope. I left both where they were. That, I said quietly, is a real good question. Frank waited. I didn't answer it. Not yet. Across the restaurant, I heard Tyler's voice rise in a short laugh. Rebecca's did not follow. Frank picked up his bourbon, finished it in one slow pull, and stood. Think about it, Walter, he said, buttoning his jacket with the unhurried movements of a man who believed time was always on his side. $8 million is a number worth sleeping on. I'll do that, I said. He walked back across the restaurant. The 3 partners at his table leaned in as he settled into his chair. I watched Frank shake his head once, just barely, and saw the partners recalibrate, shuffling papers, adjusting the conversation. Whatever Frank had expected from this table, he hadn't gotten it. I turned back to my coffee. Marcus appeared with a fresh cup before I could ask. I was starting to think that young man had a future in whatever room he decided to walk into. For a few minutes, the restaurant moved around me in its ordinary rhythms, the murmur of other conversations, the soft percussion of the kitchen behind the door, the jazz threading through everything like a river you stop noticing until it's gone. I sat with my hands around the mug and let myself be still. Then Tyler pulled out his phone. I noticed it the way you notice a shift in weather. Not a sound, just a change in the quality of the air. He looked at the screen, typed something quickly, and set the phone face down on the table. 18 seconds later, Rebecca's hand moved to her purse. She read whatever he'd sent. Her shoulders drew in slightly, the way a person draws in when they've been told to be smaller. She typed something back, short. Then she put her phone away and looked across the room toward me. I kept my face still. Tyler picked up his phone, read her reply, and looked up straight at my corner. He smiled. Not the social kind. The kind that means I know something you don't. Then he set the phone down and went back to his conversation with Frank like nothing had happened. My jaw tightened. I breathed through it. I reached into my chest pocket. Not for the envelope this time, just for the photograph. I held it in my palm under the table where no one could see it. Rebecca at 8. Laughing, completely safe. I thought about Route 21. It was a Thursday afternoon in March of 2017. Rebecca had been driving for 3 weeks, barely. I was out on the eastern edge of the property on the John Deere turning the first rows of the spring planting when my phone buzzed in my breast pocket. A woman's voice. Calm in the professional way, that means the situation is not calm. Mr. Gaines, this is the nursing staff at MUSC, the Medical University of South Carolina. Your daughter has been in an automobile accident on Route 21. You need to come right away. I don't remember turning off the tractor. I don't remember the walk back to the truck. My first clear memory after that phone call is the parking garage at MUSC, my hands on the steering wheel, not able to make them let go. The emergency room doctor met me in the hallway. Young, tired, careful with her words. She's stable, she said. But there was significant impact. She's going to need surgery. The costs. Fix her, I said. Whatever it costs. Fix my daughter. I sat in that hallway for 6 hours in my work clothes, still carrying the smell of turned earth and diesel. Nobody said a word about it. When the surgeon came out and told me the procedure had gone well, my legs stopped working correctly, and I sat down on the floor against the wall and put my face in my hands. They let me stay. 3 weeks I stayed. I slept in the chair beside her bed. I ate whatever the vending machine offered at 3 in the morning. On day 4, I drove back to the farm for 2 hours, called the equipment dealer, and sold the John Deere 8R, the machine I'd bought with the first real profit the farm ever turned for, enough to cover the surgery and the first week of recovery costs. Then I drove back to Charleston and resumed my position in that chair. On day 22, Rebecca opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling first, then at the window, then at me. Daddy. Her voice was barely there, thin as paper rough from the breathing tube. Right here, baby girl. She looked at my face for a long time. Then she looked down at my hand wrapped around hers on the blanket. You didn't leave, she said. I will never leave, I said. She closed her eyes and went back to sleep. I stayed in the chair. The kitchen door swung open behind me, and a wave of warm air broke the memory. I was back in the 1832 grill. Jazz, candlelight, the smell of browned butter. I slid the photograph back into my chest pocket. Across the room, Tyler was talking, animated, leaning forward, working the table the way salesmen work tables. Rebecca sat beside him, her wine glass untouched, her eyes tracking the conversation without fully landing on it. She had the look of someone listening in a language she's starting to realize she never actually learned. Marcus stopped at my elbow. Sir, Ms. Denton wanted me to let you know Mr. Bowen Sr. made a reservation request when he booked tonight. He asked that the private dining room be available for a contract signing later in the evening. Marcus paused, choosing his next words. She thought you should know what the back half of tonight was built for. A contract signing, of course. They hadn't come to meet Rebecca's father. They'd come to close a deal. I looked at the manila envelope on the edge of my table. Then I looked at my flannel shirt at the breast pocket where the photograph and the letter both lived. Then I looked across the restaurant at my daughter, who was staring at a glass of wine she hadn't touched. Thank you, Marcus, I said. He nodded and stepped away. And then, without being asked, without Tyler waving her over, without any visible signal at all, Rebecca pushed back her chair and walked toward my table. She sat down across from me and didn't say anything right away. That was new. Every other time Rebecca had come to this table tonight, she'd arrived with an agenda and apology to deliver information, to pass along a fire she was trying to manage. This time she just sat down and looked at me, and I could see something shifting behind her eyes. Something settling. "Tyler didn't send me over this time," she said. "I know. I needed to sit here for a minute. With you, you can sit here as long as you want, baby girl." She looked around the table at the plain white linen at my coffee mug at the kitchen door swinging intermittently behind me, and something crossed her face that looked a lot like shame. "This is where you've been sitting all evening," she said. It wasn't a question. "Good vantage point," I said. "I can see the whole room." "Daddy." Her voice broke on the word, just the single syllable split clean down the middle. "I'm so sorry." Hey." I reached across and covered her hand. "You don't carry tonight on your shoulders. That's not what this is." She pressed her lips together and nodded, working to hold herself steady. Then she looked at my breast pocket, at the slight rectangular shape visible beneath the flannel. "You've been touching that all evening," she said. "What's in there?" I looked down. Then I reached in slowly and drew out both items, the photograph first. I laid it on the table between us. Rebecca looked at it. Her breath caught. "I remember that day," she whispered. "You let me steer the tractor." For about 30 seconds. Then you aimed directly at the fence line and I had a change of heart. She laughed a short, wet sound and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Her eyes were filling. "I had it under control," she said. "You absolutely did not." She picked up the photograph with both hands, carefully, the way you handle something that matters. She studied it for a long moment, the two of us squinting into the Carolina afternoon, her gap-toothed smile, my arm around her small shoulders. And when she set it down, 2 tears ran straight down her face without her making any move to stop them. Then I drew out the second item. The envelope was small, letter-sized. The paper gone soft with age, the corners worn from 12 years of living in shirt pockets and nightstand drawers and the breast pocket of every jacket I owned. Margaret's handwriting on the front was still clear. "Rebecca," it said. And beneath that, in smaller letters, "Open when your heart needs to remember." Rebecca stared at it. Her hands went very still. "Is that—" She couldn't finish. "Your mama wrote it the week before she passed," I said. "She asked me to hold on to it until the day you found the man you wanted to marry. She made me promise." Rebecca's chin was trembling so hard, she had to press her teeth together to stop it. 12 years, she said. 11 years, 9 months, and some odd days. You counted. Your mama asked me to hold it. I took that seriously. She reached toward the envelope, then stopped, her fingers hovering just above the paper. Can I? Not quite yet, I said gently. I think you'll know when. She pulled her hand back, looked at the envelope for another long moment. Then she looked up at me with the expression of someone who has just understood something they should have understood sooner, the particular grief of a delayed realization. He called ahead, she said. Before tonight. He called the restaurant and asked them to seat you near the service entrance. Her voice was flat and precise. He told me we were doing assigned seating for the party. He never said anything about... She stopped, swallowed. I believed him. I know you did. How long have you known? Carol told me earlier tonight. She keeps written records of requests that don't feel right. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The tears had stopped, replaced by something harder and quieter. The land, she said. The zoning application. The business partners with their portfolios. She looked at me steadily. How long have you known about all of it? 2 weeks. My lawyer found the filing. And you came tonight anyway, dressed like this, knowing everything. I needed you to see it yourself, I said. Not because I told you, because you watched it happen. I paused. That was the only way it would be real to you. I know that about you. You've always been like your mama that way. You need to feel the truth, not just hear it. Rebecca looked down at the table. One hand moved to her left ring finger, not pulling at the ring, just resting against it, the way you rest your hand against something you're reconsidering. Then Frank Bowen appeared at the edge of our table. He looked at Rebecca, then at me with the smooth recovery of a man who processed surprises quickly. I didn't mean to interrupt, he said, pulling out the third chair without waiting. Then don't, Rebecca said. Frank stopped. He looked at her genuinely surprised, I thought perhaps for the first time this evening. Rebecca, he said carefully, I think there are some things about tonight that your father and I should discuss privately. Business matters that don't need to. Mr. Bowen. Rebecca's voice was quiet and absolutely steady. Whatever you came to say to my father, you can say in front of me. I'm not leaving this table. Frank looked at me. I picked up my coffee and said nothing. He sat down. Frank settled into the chair like a man who had decided that the change in seating arrangement was actually an opportunity. He looked at Rebecca first, a measured look, the kind that takes stock without appearing to. Then he looked at me. Then he placed his hands flat on the table, a gesture I'd seen politicians use when they wanted to signal openness, and began. I'll be honest with both of you, he said. That's the only way I know how to do business. Then go ahead, Rebecca said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were in her lap where I couldn't see them, but her shoulders were straight. Frank nodded. Bowen Property Group has a development opportunity in Orangeburg County that we've been building toward for 18 months. Infrastructure studies, environmental clearances, investor commitments, serious work by serious people. The project is positioned to generate $32 million in revenue over the first 5 years, and considerably more after that. He paused. The eastern boundary of the development zone runs directly along 1,200 acres of your father's property. Without that section, the entire project is restructured. Significantly. How significantly? Rebecca asked. The difference between what I just described and a much smaller, much less profitable undertaking. Frank looked at me. Walter, I want to put a number on the table. Not as pressure as respect. We're prepared to offer $8 million for the 1,200 acres. Fair market value verified by independent appraisal, plus a 10% family consideration. That's a real number. It's a life-changing number. Rebecca turned to look at me. I picked up my coffee mug, set it down again. Frank, I said, that land has been in my family for 40 years. My wife is buried a quarter mile from the eastern fence line you're talking about. My daughter learned to drive on the road that runs through it. I looked at him steadily. What makes you think $8 million is the relevant number? Frank leaned forward slightly. What number would be relevant? There isn't one. The table went quiet. Frank absorbed that recalculating behind his eyes. Walter, no court in South Carolina can compel me to sell land I own outright, I said. No family arrangement, no business proposal, and no wedding changes that. My property is my property until I decide otherwise. I want to be clear about that for everyone at this table. Frank's jaw shifted. He looked at Rebecca, perhaps expecting an ally, but Rebecca was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on her face all evening. something focused, something awake. Then let's talk about the family dimension, Frank said, pivoting smoothly. Rebecca and Tyler are building a future. That future benefits from stability from resources. If the farm were converted to liquid assets, those resources could work for the next generation in ways that land simply. The farm is not a resource, Rebecca said. Frank stopped. My mother is buried on that land, she said. My father built everything he has on that land. It's not a resource, Mr. Bowen. It's a home. Frank looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his bourbon glass, found it empty, and set it back down. I understand sentiment, he said carefully. I do. But sentiment and sound financial planning are two different conversations. They are, I agreed. So let me have a different conversation with you. I set my hands flat on the table. The farm is in trouble, Frank. Last season's drought hit us harder than I've let on. I'm carrying a debt to First National Bank of $300,000 that comes due before the end of the year. I may need help. Frank's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected that. How much help? He asked. I'm not sure yet. I may need to ask Rebecca to co-sign on a refinancing arrangement. Rebecca looked at me. I gave her the smallest possible nod, just enough to tell her to watch what happened next. Frank sat back in his chair. Something moved across his face, not sympathy, not concern, calculation. He was running numbers, adjusting variables, updating a spreadsheet behind his eyes. Walter, he said slowly, if the farm is carrying that kind of debt load, that actually changes the calculus here. An asset under financial pressure is harder to maintain, harder to pass on. It becomes a liability rather than a legacy, which is exactly why a clean sale now. How much of Tyler's debt is your company carrying? I asked. Frank stopped. I'm sorry. Your son borrowed $80,000 from me 3 years ago, I said. He used my name as guarantor on a separate financing arrangement without my knowledge or consent. I'm wondering how much of his financial picture you're actually aware of before you start advising me about debt management. The color changed in Frank's face, not dramatically, just a degree or two, like a shade being drawn. That's a private matter between Tyler and Shakita Kitium. It became less private when my name appeared on a legal document I never signed, I said. Under South Carolina law, a forged signature on a financing instrument is a felony. I want you to know that I know that. And I want you to know that what happens with that information tonight depends entirely on what happens at this table. Frank was very still. Rebecca's head turned toward me slowly. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the particular alertness of someone watching a situation reveal itself in real time. Dad. The voice came from across the restaurant. Tyler was on his feet, moving toward us, his face arranged in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He'd been watching the table. He'd seen something he didn't like in Frank's body language, and now he was coming to manage it. I picked up my coffee, took a slow sip, and waited for him to arrive. Tyler arrived at the table with his smile already in place, the one he kept for situations that needed managing. He pulled the fourth chair around without asking and positioned it between Frank and Rebecca, which put him directly across from me. He looked at his father. First read something in Frank's expression that he didn't like, and then turned to me with the practiced ease of a man who believed charm was a universal solvent. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important, he said. You're not, Frank said, with a flatness that made Tyler's smile flicker. Walter. Tyler folded his hands on the table. I want to apologize for earlier. The comment at the door that was out of line. I was stressed about the evening and I took it out in the wrong direction. I looked at him. All right. I mean it genuinely. I heard you the first time, son. Tyler held my gaze for a moment, then turned to Rebecca. He reached over and touched her hand. She let him, but she didn't turn toward him. Everything okay over here? He asked her. Your father was discussing the Orangeburg project, Rebecca said. In detail. Tyler's hand stilled on hers. He looked at Frank. We were just having a general conversation about, Frank started. He offered $8 million for 1,200 acres of the farm, Rebecca said. He explained the $32 million development projection. He told us the project falls apart without our land. The word "our" landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a height. Tyler looked at me. The apology was gone from his face, now replaced by something more honest. Walter. He said, the Orangeburg opportunity is real. Whatever you may have heard about the timeline or your father's already made the pitch, I said. I told him the land isn't for sale. Tyler breathed in through his nose, set his jaw, recalibrated. I understand you have an attachment to the property, he said carefully. That's completely natural. But I want to be honest with you, Rebecca, and I are starting a life together. A real life. And a $300,000 debt on an aging farm operation is the kind of thing that affects everyone in the family. Not just you. The table went very still. Rebecca turned to look at Tyler slowly. I didn't tell him about the debt, she said. Your father mentioned it, Tyler said without missing a beat. Just now, she said, while you were across the room. Tyler opened his mouth, closed it. You were watching, Rebecca said. Not an accusation, just an observation delivered with a quiet precision that was more devastating than anger. Tyler pivoted. He looked at me directly, and the last of the social performance dropped away. $300,000 is a serious number, he said. At your age, with that kind of liability against the property, you're looking at a very difficult few years, possibly losing the farm entirely if the refinancing falls through. I don't want that for Rebecca. I don't want her carrying that. Is that right? I said. I think, and I say this with respect, that the responsible thing would be for Rebecca to establish some financial boundaries going into the marriage. Her assets, my assets, kept separate from whatever situation develops with the farm. I don't think it's fair to ask her to take on obligations that originated before our relationship. Rebecca's chin dropped. She stared at the table. Tyler, she said. Her voice was very quiet. I'm being practical, Rebecca. Somebody has to be. You're telling my father. She stopped, pressed her lips together hard. When she spoke again, her voice had a tremor in it that was not weakness but fury held barely in check. You're sitting at his table in his restaurant on his land, telling him that his debt is not our problem. Technically, this restaurant belongs to... Do not. She cut him off. Do not say another word about what belongs to who. Not right now. Tyler looked at her with the expression of a man who had miscalculated the wind direction. Rebecca, he sold his tractor, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pushed through it. He sold the machine that ran this farm so I could have surgery when I was 16 years old. He sat in a hospital hallway for 3 weeks in the same flannel shirt he's wearing tonight because he couldn't afford to go home and come back. And you are sitting here telling me his problems are not ours. That was a different... He is my father. Her voice broke fully now, tears spilling without apology, her hands gripping the edge of the table. He is my father, Tyler, and you called ahead to have him seated by the trash. The words landed like a door slamming. Tyler went very still. At the next table, the couple who had been quietly eating paused. I didn't look at them. I was watching my daughter, whose shoulders were shaking and whose jaw was set and who was not. I realized going to stop. "I want to know," she said, her voice dropping to something fierce and low. "Exactly what you said when you made that reservation call, word for word." Tyler looked at Frank. Frank looked at the table. "Rebecca," Tyler started. "Word for word," she said. He didn't answer, and the silence he left in place of an answer told her everything she needed to know. She looked at me, then really looked at me the way she had when she was 22 years old, and I'd handed her the keys to the farm truck and told her the land would always be here, and something in her face completed itself. Resolved. Like a knot finally pulled tight in the right direction. "Daddy," she said, "whatever's in that envelope, I think it's time. Before I tell you what was inside that envelope, drop an open in the comments if you're still here." Because what Tyler was about to read would end the evening in a way he never saw coming. Some names and details have been fictionalized for storytelling. If that's not something you're here for, this is a good place to step away. No judgment. I reached across the table and picked up the manila envelope. It wasn't heavy. That always surprised people, how little weight the truth carried before it landed. I set it in front of me and pressed one hand flat against it for just a moment. 40 years of building something. 6 months of documenting what someone else had been trying to take apart. All of it compressed into a 1/4 inch of paper. Tyler looked at the envelope. Something moved behind his eyes, not fear yet, but the early cousin of it. Alertness. The animal instinct that tells you the terrain has changed. "What is that?" he asked. "Everything I've learned about you in the past 6 months," I said. "You had me investigated." His voice came out harder than he'd intended. He heard it himself and adjusted. "That's you had someone following me. I hired a licensed private investigative firm fully certified under South Carolina Code 4018, I said. "Everything in this envelope comes from public records, legal filings, and documents provided voluntarily by people you trusted. Nothing was obtained illegally. I want to be clear about that before we begin." Frank straightened in his chair. His bourbon glass was empty, and he didn't call for another. Rebecca sat with both hands flat on the table, her eyes on the envelope, her jaw set. I opened the clasp and drew out the first document. "Bank transfer confirmation," I said, placing it on the table where everyone could see. "Electronic transfer March 14th, 2022, from the Gaines Farm operating account to a personal checking account held by Tyler James Bowen. Amount $80,000 even." I looked at Tyler. "This is the money you asked me for 3 years ago. The money you said you'd return within 18 months. The money you swore on Rebecca's name." Tyler's jaw tightened. "Business arrangements don't always. Have you repaid any portion of this?" He said nothing. "I'll take that as a no." I set the confirmation aside and reached into the envelope again. "This is a UCC1 financing statement." I placed the second document on the table. "A Uniform Commercial Code filing a public record available through the South Carolina Secretary of State's office, which means anyone with internet access can find it. It records a secured business loan taken out by Bowen Consulting, LLC, 18 months ago." I pointed to a line near the bottom of the page. "The guarantor listed on this filing is Walter R. Gaines. My name, my address, my signature. I let that sit for 3 full seconds. I never signed this document." Rebecca made a sound, short, involuntary, like something small breaking. Frank's hands came off the table. He pressed them together in his lap. "Tyler." Frank's voice had lost every trace of the smooth boardroom warmth it had carried all evening. What was left was flat and tired. How many documents have his name on them? Tyler looked at his father. Something passed between them, not communication, just the recognition that a wall had come down. "One," Tyler said. His voice had gone thin. "You're certain?" "One document? The guarantor line. The loan needed a co-signer and I thought—" "You thought what?" Rebecca said. Tyler turned to her. Whatever he saw in her face made him stop. "Rebecca, you forged my father's signature." She said it quietly, with the particular stillness of someone who has moved past the point where volume matters. "You used his name on a legal document without asking him, without telling him, without—" Her voice fractured, and she pressed her hand over her mouth for just a moment, then pulled it away. "He gave you $80,000 because I asked him to. He trusted you because I asked him to. And you, Ticho—" "It was one document," Tyler said. "I was going to tell him when." Her eyes were burning. "When were you going to tell him, before or after you convinced him to sell 1,200 acres to your father's company?" The table went utterly quiet. Frank looked at the tablecloth. Sandra from across the restaurant had noticed the change in the atmosphere at our table and was watching now with the focused attention of someone who knew the performance had shifted, but not yet how. I drew out the third document. "This is the investigative summary," I said. "Compiled over 6 months from public records, court documents, and voluntary statements." I placed it in the center of the table. It includes a record of 17 phone calls between Tyler and Frank Bowen in the 4 weeks before Rebecca received her engagement ring, several of which occurred on the same days as communications between Bowen Property Group and the Orangeburg County Planning Office. I folded my hands on the table. I'm not a lawyer, but the pattern is not difficult to read. Frank stood up. Not dramatically, just stood the way a man stands when he needs to think on his feet and can no longer do it sitting down. "Walter," he said, "whatever you believe about the timeline of our business planning." "Frank." I looked up at him. "Your son used my daughter to get to my land. He used my name on a legal document without my consent. And he stood in the entrance of this restaurant tonight and told me I smelled like a hog pen." I kept my voice level. "I want you to sit back down, because we're not finished." Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he sat down. Tyler looked at Rebecca. She was looking at the 3 documents spread across the white tablecloth: the bank transfer, the UCC filing, the investigative summary, and her expression was the expression of someone reading a story they had been living without knowing the title. "Say something," Tyler said. She looked up at him. "I'm trying to figure out," she said slowly, "how long you knew about the land, about what tonight was actually for." Her voice was very careful, very controlled, the way a person speaks when they are furious and heartbroken simultaneously and cannot afford to collapse. "Was it always this from the beginning?" Tyler opened his mouth, and before he could answer, Carol Denton walked across the restaurant toward our table with a single sheet of paper in her hand and an expression on her face that said she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Carol Denton stopped at the edge of our table and looked at each of us in turn, Frank, Tyler, Rebecca, me, with the calm of someone who had made a decision and was no longer second-guessing it. She placed the sheet of paper on the table beside the 3 documents already there. "This is the reservation log from 2 weeks ago, Tuesday," she said. "I keep written records of every non-standard request made in connection with a booking. It's policy 1 I put in place myself 3 years ago after a situation that taught me the value of documentation." She looked at Tyler directly. "At 4:17 in the afternoon, I received a call from a man who identified himself as Tyler Bowen. He confirmed the reservation for this evening and made a secondary request. He asked that and I am reading directly from my notes, elderly farm worker accompanying the party, be seated away from the main dining area, preferably near the service entrance, so as not to, quote, make other guests uncomfortable. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. Rebecca's head turned toward Tyler with the slow, inexorable movement of something that cannot be stopped. Elderly farm worker, she said, each word separate, each one deliberate. Tyler's face had gone the color of old chalk. Rebecca, the phrasing was, my father. Her voice cracked wide open. The tears she had been managing for the past 2 hours broke through all at once, running down her face without any attempt to hide them. Her shoulders shook once hard, like something had struck her from behind. You called my father an elderly farm worker and asked them to put him by the trash. I was trying to manage the stop. She pressed both palms against the table and leaned forward. Stop explaining it. Stop managing it. Just stop. Tyler stopped. Sandra had crossed the restaurant. She stood now at the edge of the table, her fur coat over her arm, her face rearranged into the expression of a woman preparing to defend something she no longer fully believed in. Carol, Sandra said, I think you've said quite enough for a restaurant employee. Mrs. Bowen. Carol turned to face her, and there was nothing deferential in her posture. Nothing uncertain. I have worked in this building for 11 years. I know every inch of it. And I think it's past time that everyone at this table understood what building they're actually standing in. She looked around the table. Then she looked out at the broader dining room where several nearby tables had stopped pretending not to listen. Walter Gaines. Carol said, her voice carrying clearly now, is the sole owner of Gaines Harvest Company, 2,800 acres of integrated farmland in Orangeburg County, 3 agricultural processing facilities, the 3 largest in the state of South Carolina. Controlling shareholder of Gaines Harvest Group, which supplies produce to over 40 restaurant chains across the Southeast, representing contracts valued at more than $60 million annually. She paused. And this restaurant, the 1832 Grill, is built on land owned by Gaines Harvest Company under a 30-year commercial lease agreement. The lease Walter Gaines signed personally, which means the floor you are standing on, the chandelier above your head, and the table at which you have been sitting all evening, all of it exists here because this man allowed it to. The dining room had gone very quiet. Frank Bowen looked at me. His face had the particular blankness of a man whose internal architecture has just been knocked sideways. Your Gaines Harvest. His voice came out stripped of everything, the warmth, the strategy, the bourbon confidence. Just the bare fact of realization. The Gaines Harvest Group. I'm just Walter, I said. The farmer. Sandra sat down heavily in the nearest empty chair. The fur coat slid off her arm and she didn't pick it up. One of Frank's business partners had his phone out. He was typing something, searching, I imagined, and finding results that were rearranging his evening considerably. Tyler looked at me, then at the documents on the table, then at Carol, then at Rebecca. Rebecca was looking at none of them. She was looking at her hands, both of them flat on the white linen, the diamond on her left hand catching the candlelight, the way it had caught it all evening, bright and indifferent. I want to ask you something, she said. She was speaking to Tyler but not looking at him. And I need you to tell me the truth. Not the managed version, the actual truth. Tyler said nothing. She looked up at him. Did you know who my father was when you asked me to marry you? The question sat between them like an open door into a room neither of them wanted to enter. Tyler's mouth opened. He looked at Frank one brief, involuntary look, and that look was the answer. More complete and more damning than anything he could have said. Rebecca saw it. Her chin dropped to her chest. One breath in, one breath out. When she raised her head again, something in her face had resolved itself quietly, permanently, the way a bone sets after it's been broken and properly tended. She looked at me. "Daddy," she said. "Is there anything else in that envelope?" "One more thing," I said. I reached in and drew out the last document, a single sheet folded once. I placed it in front of her. She unfolded it, read it. Her hands were completely steady now. It was a timeline. 18 months of dates. Frank's zoning filings, Tyler's phone calls, the engagement announcement. The reservation request laid out in sequence, clean and irrefutable. She folded it again, set it down, and reached up slowly to her left hand. Rebecca's fingers closed around the diamond and twisted it free in one slow, deliberate motion. She held it for a moment, just a moment, turning it once in the candlelight, so the stone caught and scattered light across the white tablecloth. Then she set it down in the center of the table between herself and Tyler. The sound it made against the linen was almost nothing, a whisper of metal. But everyone at the table heard it. Tyler stared at the ring. "Rebecca." His voice had lost every layer of polish it had carried all evening. What remained was raw and unsteady. "Rebecca, don't do this here." "I'm not doing anything here that wasn't already done," she said. Her voice was quiet and absolute. "You did this. Every call you made, every document you signed, every plan you built around my father's land, you did all of it before you ever put that ring on my finger. I just didn't know yet." "That's not—" He reached for her hand. She moved it away. Not dramatically, just a slight clean withdrawal that was more final than any gesture she could have made. "Don't," she said. Tyler looked at me. His eyes were red at the edges now, and I recognized the expression on his face, not remorse, not quite. Something closer to the panic of a man who has watched a transaction fall through at the last moment. "Walter." His voice shifted into an appeal. "Whatever you think happened here, I love your daughter. That part was never part of any plan." I looked at him for a long moment. "Son," I said, "the men I've respected most in my life have been men who could tell the difference between loving something and wanting to own it." I kept my voice even. "I hope you figure out which one you were doing." Tyler's jaw worked. He looked at his father. Frank had aged 10 years in the past 20 minutes. He sat with his hands in his lap, the Orangeburg proposal folder closed on the table in front of him, his bourbon long gone, his 3 business partners noticeably absent. They had gathered their portfolios and made quiet exits while Carol was speaking. Frank looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected from him. Not anger, not calculation. Something closer to exhaustion. "Walter," he said. "The project. We've put 18 months and a significant amount of capital into the Orangeburg development. I understand tonight has gone in a direction none of us intended. But the business matter that's separate from what happened between Tyler and Rebecca. Surely we can, Frank." I folded my hands on the table. 2 months ago, my operations team submitted a labor practices audit on Bowen Property Group's Orangeburg construction sites. They found consistent underpayment of day laborers, men working 10-hour shifts in Carolina summer heat, for wages below the state minimum threshold. Several of those men live in communities that border my farmland. Some of their children have eaten food grown on my fields. Frank said nothing. "I've spent 40 years building a company on the principle that the people who work the land deserve to be treated with dignity," I said. I pay my workers above market rate. I provide housing assistance for seasonal staff. I've put 11 kids from Orangeburg County through college on scholarship. I paused. A business partner who looks down on working people in their personal life and underpays them in their professional life is not someone I can do business with. The Orangeburg proposal is declined. Permanently. Frank closed his eyes for just a second. When he opened them, the last of the evening's performance was gone. The investors, he said quietly. The commitments we've made. Are your responsibility to manage? I said. Not mine. Sandra stood up from the chair where she'd been sitting. Her voice when she spoke had lost the porcelain quality it had carried all evening. It sounded tired and slightly brittle, like something that had been maintained at great effort for a long time. We came here tonight in good faith, she said. Whatever Tyler did, whatever mistakes were made, we are a family. Families find a way through. Mrs. Bowen, I said, your son called my daughter's father an elderly farm worker and arranged to have him seated at the service entrance. Your husband built a 14-month acquisition strategy around my daughter's relationship. I looked at her steadily. I wish your family well, but we won't be building a future together. Sandra opened her mouth, closed it. Then she picked up her fur coat from the chair where it had fallen and walked toward the front of the restaurant without another word. Her heels on the hardwood were slower than when she'd arrived. Tyler looked at the ring on the table. He looked at Rebecca. She was watching him with an expression that I can only describe as the face of someone who has finished grieving something while it was still in front of them. I did love you, he said. Low, almost to himself. I know, Rebecca said. I think that part was real. I just think it wasn't enough of what you were doing. He reached out and picked up the ring, held it for a moment in his fist. Then he pushed back his chair and stood. He straightened his jacket, that same gesture of reasserting order that his father used, and looked at me one final time. For what it's worth, he said. I didn't think you'd ever find any of it. I know you didn't, I said. That was the first mistake. He walked away from the table. Frank followed without speaking. The dining room, which had been holding its breath for the last 10 minutes, released it slowly as the two of them moved toward the exit. I watched them go. Then I looked at my daughter. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the place where the ring had been. The candlelight moved across her face. Daddy, she said without looking up. Right here, baby girl. I think I need a minute. Take all the time you need. She nodded, and I reached into my breast pocket and touched the small folded envelope with Margaret's handwriting on the front, and I thought not yet, but soon. The restaurant slowly remembered how to breathe. Conversations resumed at neighboring tables, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, as if the room was testing whether the air had cleared. The jazz came back into focus. Somewhere near the kitchen, Marcus was resetting a table, his movements quiet and methodical. The chandelier above us had not changed its light all evening, but it seemed warmer now, or perhaps I was only noticing it for the first time. Rebecca and I sat across from each other at the small table by the kitchen door, the table where I had started the evening alone. She had not spoken in several minutes, and I had not pushed. Some silences need to be finished before they can be left behind. She was staring at the white tablecloth, at the faint rectangular impression left by the documents that had been spread across it. Her eyes were dry now, red at the corners, but dry. He knew, she said finally, from the beginning. He knew who you were. I believe so. Or he found out early enough that it amounts to the same thing. She pressed her lips together. I kept telling myself it wasn't like that. that I was being paranoid, that people don't actually. She stopped. But they do. Some of them do, I said. Most don't. You'll remember that eventually. She looked up at me. How are you this calm? I'm not calm, I said. I'm just old enough to know that falling apart in the middle of something doesn't make the something easier to deal with. I paused. Your mama was the same way. She could be breaking in half on the inside and still make breakfast. Rebecca's mouth moved, not quite a smile, not quite not one. I miss her, she said. Every day. She looked at my breast pocket. The envelope was visible there, the slight rectangular shape of it pressing softly against the flannel. How you said soon, she said. I reached in slowly and drew it out. It looked exactly as it had looked for 12 years, small, soft at the corners, Margaret's handwriting still clear on the front. Rebecca, it said. And below that, in smaller letters that I had memorized without meaning to open when your heart needs to remember, I placed it on the table between us. Rebecca stared at it for a long moment. Then she picked it up with both hands carefully, the way she had picked up the photograph earlier, and turned it over. The flap was sealed with tape that had yellowed at the edges. She worked it open gently, as if she were afraid of tearing what was inside. She unfolded the single sheet of paper. I looked away. I had read the letter once, 12 years ago, when Margaret had pressed it into my hands in the hospital and asked me to keep it safe. I had not read it since. Some things you only need to read once. I listened to the restaurant around us and let my daughter have her time with her mother. After a while, I heard her breath change. A sharp intake held, then released in a long, uneven exhale. Then the quiet sound of someone crying who has decided to stop fighting it. I turned back. Rebecca was holding the letter against her chest with both arms crossed over it. Her head bent, her shoulders moving with the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and has been waiting a long time for permission. Not grief, exactly. Not only grief. Something more complicated, the particular ache of being loved well by someone who is no longer there to see how the story turned out. I moved my chair around the table and sat beside her, put my arm around her shoulders. She leaned into me the way she had when she was small, completely without reservation, the way children lean when they still believe the person holding them can fix anything. We sat like that for a while. Eventually, her breathing evened out. She lifted her head and wiped her face with the back of her hand, her mother's gesture quick and unsentimental. She knew, Rebecca said. She wrote about it, about watching how someone treats people who can't do anything for them. Her voice was rough but steady. She said it was the only test that mattered. She was right about most things, I said. She said you sold your truck. Rebecca looked at me. Your blue Ford, the one you had before I was born. She said you sold it for her first treatment and never told her. She found out from the neighbor. Mabel Hutchins, I said. That woman could not keep a secret to save her life. Rebecca laughed, a real one, surprised out of her wet around the edges, but genuine. It was the best sound I had heard all evening. She said to watch how the man I chose talked about you. Rebecca said quieter now. She said that would tell me everything. And she folded the letter along its original creases slowly and carefully and slid it back into the envelope. And I watched, she said. Tonight I watched. Carol Denton appeared at the edge of our table, not intruding, just present the way good managers make themselves available without imposing. She looked at Rebecca, then at me with an expression that held 11 years of knowing me compressed into a single glance. Can I get either of you anything? She asked. 2 coffees, I said. And whatever Marcus is having, that young man has earned something tonight. Carol smiled. He has. She paused. Mr. Gaines, for what it's worth, it was an honor. All of it. The honor was mine, Carol. She left. Rebecca watched her go. She loves you, Rebecca said. She loves what her father taught her about loyalty, I said. I just happened to give him a chance to practice it. Rebecca looked down at the envelope in her hands. Then she tucked it carefully into her purse in the inner pocket close. Daddy, she said. Yeah. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it. I put my hand over hers on the table, my rough, weathered, clay-stained hand over her smooth one. You saw it, I said. That's what matters. You saw it and you made the right call. Your mama would have been proud of you tonight. Rebecca's eyes filled again. She blinked hard. Don't make me cry again, she said. I've used up everything I had. All right, I said. Then let's just drink our coffee. And we did. The coffee was good. I don't know why that surprised me. It was the same restaurant, the same kitchen, the same beans Carol had been sourcing from a farm in Guatemala for the past 3 years. But there was something about sitting at this particular table at this particular hour with the dining room settling back into its ordinary rhythms around us that made everything taste cleaner than it had any right to. Rebecca wrapped both hands around her mug, the way I wrapped mine, something she'd picked up, without knowing it, the way children absorb the habits of the people who raise them. She looked steadier now. Not healed, you don't heal from an evening like this one in the space of a cup of coffee, but steadier. Like a tree after a storm that has discovered its roots held. What happens to Tyler? She asked. Legally. The UCC filing with the forged signature is a public record, I said. My attorney will file a formal dispute with the South Carolina Secretary of State's office to have my name removed as guarantor. That process is straightforward, the bank transfer records showing I never authorized a guarantee on that loan are sufficient documentation. I turned the mug in my hands. Whether Tyler faces criminal charges for the forgery is a separate matter under South Carolina Code 161310. That decision belongs to the county prosecutor, not to me. I'll cooperate with whatever process follows. But I won't be the one driving it. Rebecca nodded slowly. You could have driven it. 6 months ago when you found out. I could have. Why didn't you? I looked at her across the table. Because the day the sheriff showed up at Tyler's door would have been the day you stopped being able to make your own choice about him. It would have become about the legal situation instead of the truth. I set my mug down. I needed you to see who he was before the lawyers got involved, and everything became complicated and argued over. Once you saw it clearly, then the rest could follow its own course. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. But that was very calculated of you, she said. Not an accusation. Just an observation delivered with a slight tilt of her head that was entirely her mother. It was, I admitted. And it brings me to something I owe you. She looked up. I handled this wrong, I said. Not the investigation that I don't regret, but the test. Turning tonight into a performance. Letting you sit through 3 hours of that without telling you what I knew. I met her eyes. You're my daughter, not a variable in a plan. I should have come to you directly when I found out about the land deal. I should have sat down with you at the kitchen table at the farm and told you what I'd learned and let you decide what to do with it. Instead, I turned your engagement dinner into something else entirely, and you paid for that tonight in ways you shouldn't have had to. Rebecca looked at me for a long time. You were trying to protect me, she said. I was trying to protect you, and I was trying to be right, I said. Those aren't always the same thing. Tonight I was both, and I'm not sure the second one justified the cost of the first. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, my rough, clay-darkened hand. and held it there. "Okay," she said. "I hear you. And I think you're right that you could have come to me sooner." She paused. "But Daddy, if you had told me 6 months ago, or 3 months ago, or even last week, I don't know that I would have believed you. I was in love with him. Or I thought I was. I think I needed to be in the room when it happened. I think I needed to see his face when he decided his father's business was more important than answering me honestly." Her hand tightened on mine. "So I'm not sure the outcome would have been different. Just the path to it." I turned my hand over and held hers. "Your mama used to say that the road to the right place isn't always the right road," I said. "She was full of things like that. She was the wisest person I ever knew, and I knew her for 31 years before she left, which means I had 31 years of evidence." Rebecca smiled, a real one, quiet and a little sad and completely genuine. The kind of smile that holds grief and gratitude in the same breath. Marcus appeared at the edge of the table with the coffee pot. He refilled both mugs without being asked, set a small plate of shortbread cookies on the table also without being asked, and withdrew with the particular tact of someone who understood that the best thing he could do for us right now was keep our cups full and stay out of the way. "I like him," Rebecca said, watching him go. "He's going places," I said. "Charleston Southern Hospitality Management. I'm going to call the department chair next week." Rebecca looked at me. "You're going to get him a scholarship. I'm going to make sure someone looks at his file. What happens after that is up to him." She shook her head slowly, not in disagreement, just in the recognition of something she had always known. "You've been doing that your whole life," she said. "Haven't you? Just quietly. Finding people and making sure someone looks at their file. I create 'em." "Your grandfather did it for me," I said. 50 years ago when I was 22 and had $300 and a piece of land I didn't know how to farm. A man named Earl Guthrie made a phone call to the Orangeburg County Extension Office and made sure someone came out and taught me what I was doing wrong. I picked up my coffee. Earl Guthrie died in 2003. I never got to pay him back directly. So I paid it forward. That's how it works. Rebecca looked out the window. The Charleston harbor, the city lights smeared gold on the water. The same view Tyler had claimed for himself at the beginning of the evening. "What happens to the farm?" she asked. "Same thing that's been happening to it for 40 years, I said. "We wake up at 4:30 and we work." "We," she said. I looked at her. "If you'll have me," she said. "Not full-time, I have my own work. But on weekends, during harvest, when you need an extra set of hands that don't mind getting dirty." She looked at me steadily. I forgot what it felt like to be on that land. I think I'd like to remember. Something moved in my chest that I didn't have a precise word for. Not happiness exactly. Completion, maybe. "You remember where the East Field gate key is?" I asked. "It's a nail by the back door," she said. "Same place it's always been." "Then you know where to find me Saturday morning." She picked up her coffee mug. I picked up mine. We sat in the warm light of the 1832 grill and drank our coffee, and outside the harbor, lights reflected off the water, and somewhere in the kitchen, Marcus was cleaning up and the jazz played on, and for the first time all evening, I felt the particular peace of a man who has done what he came to do. I left the 1832 grill at 12:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the truck's dash when I pulled out of the parking structure and onto the cobblestone street, and I thought, "Margaret, it's almost 1 in the morning and I'm driving home from the strangest dinner of my life, and I wish you had been there, and I'm glad you weren't, and I love you, and these boots still have mud on them." The drive back to Orangeburg County was 90 minutes of dark highway and my own thoughts. I didn't turn on the radio. I drove the way I've always driven late at night, windows cracked, one hand on the wheel, the yellow center line pulling me forward through the dark. I thought about Rebecca, about the way she had looked when she put the letter back in the envelope, careful, deliberate, like she was storing something she intended to carry for a long time. About her voice when she said she knew where the Eastfield gate key was. About the way she had hugged me in the parking lot before we went to our separate vehicles, long and hard, both arms, the way she had hugged me when she was 9 years old and had woken from a nightmare and found me still awake in the kitchen. "Saturday," she had said into my shoulder. "Saturday," I had said back. Duke was waiting at the gate when I pulled in. He always waited no matter the hour, some combination of old habit and whatever dogs know about the people they love that the people never quite understand. He wagged his whole back half when my headlights swept across him, and when I got out of the truck, he pressed his head against my leg and stayed there while I scratched his ears. "Quite a night, old boy," I said. He wagged again. I took that as agreement. I did not sleep well, which was not surprising. I lay in the dark and listened to the farm, the particular night sounds of 2,800 acres of Carolina farmland in September. The insects, the distant movement of the tree line in the wind, the occasional low sound from the animal pens on the south side of the property. Sounds I'd been hearing for 40 years. Sounds that had held me together through things that should have come apart. At 4:15, I gave up on sleep and got up. Coffee, boots, the flannel shirt still carrying the faint smell of the restaurant browned butter and candle smoke, and whatever the evening had been made of. I pulled it on anyway. I walked out to the east field as the sky was beginning to lighten at its far edge. Not light, yet just the earliest suggestion of it, the darkness thinning from black to a deep, uncertain gray. The red clay was cool under my boots. The corn was past its peak now, the stalks drying toward harvest, and they moved in the morning wind with a sound like paper being turned. I stood at the eastern fence line. 1,200 acres of this view was what Frank Bowen had wanted to turn into condominiums and mixed-use commercial space. I looked at it in the pre-dawn gray and felt no particular anger about that, just a quiet, settled clarity. Some things are not for sale. Not because of sentiment, though. Sentiment is real. Because some land holds the shape of the people who worked it. And when you sell that land, you are selling something you cannot name on a deed, but cannot recover once it's gone. Margaret was buried a quarter-mile north of where I was standing. I had placed the headstone myself with help from James Denton and 2 men from the county who had worked the farm for 15 years. On the stone I had put her name, her dates, and one line from something she had said to me the year before Rebecca was born. "Standing in this same field, at this same hour, this is enough. This has always been enough." I stood there until the sun came up. The following week, I called my attorney and initiated the formal dispute process with the South Carolina Secretary of State to remove my name from the UCC filing. The process, as I had explained to Rebecca, was straightforward. The bank records were clear, the timeline was clear, and the signature comparison was not a matter of significant dispute. My attorney estimated resolution within 60 days. The question of criminal charges for the forgery moved, as I had said it would, through its own channel. I provided documentation to the county prosecutor's office. What followed from that was not mine to control, and I did not try to control it. The week after that, I established the Margaret Gaines Scholarship Fund, a 501c3 nonprofit organization filed with the state and the IRS, funded by the amount I had set aside as a wedding gift for Rebecca. The fund would provide full college tuition for 3 students annually from Orangeburg County farming families. I appointed a board of 5 local educators to manage the selection process and asked Carol Denton to serve as the fund's community liaison, a role she accepted before I had finished explaining what it involved. Carol herself was appointed in that same conversation as executive director of the restaurant division of Gaines Harvest Group. 3 locations, currently operating 2 more in development. She had been running the 1832 Grill for 11 years. She knew the work. She deserved the title and the compensation that went with it. I called Marcus 2 weeks later. Not to offer him anything directly, that was not how Earl Guthrie had done it for me, and I believed in the method. I called the department chair of the Hospitality Management Program at Charleston Southern University and told her there was a young man in her program named Marcus who was worth paying attention to. I gave her my number and told her to call me if there was ever a question of resources standing between him and finishing what he'd started. The rest of it, the farm, the company, the 40 years of early mornings, continued as it had always continued. The harvest came in. The crews worked. The processing facilities ran 3 shifts. The contracts held. Rebecca came on Saturday. She arrived at 5:15, which was earlier than I had expected, and exactly when her mother would have arrived. She had on old jeans and work boots. I didn't recognize new ones purchased for the occasion, still stiff at the ankle. She was carrying 2 coffees from the gas station on Route 21, the same station I had been stopping at since before she was born. She handed me one through the truck window. "You're late," I said. "I'm 15 minutes early," she said. "On this farm, 15 minutes early is late." She laughed. And we drove out to the east field together in the gray before sunrise, and she sat beside me on the tailgate while the light came up over the cornfields, and we drank our gas station coffee, and neither of us said very much. It was enough. It had always been enough. December came to Orangeburg County the way it always does, quietly, without announcement. The fields gone brown, and still the tree line stripped bare against a sky the color of old pewter. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee when Rebecca's truck turned through the gate. Duke lifted his head from the boards, identified the engine sound, and put his head back down. He had learned her truck by the 3rd Saturday she came. She climbed out carrying 2 gas station coffees. She had made this her habit. The same way I had made waking at 4:30 mine, and there was something in that small continuity that settled in my chest every time I saw it. "Morning," she said, handing one up to me. "Morning, baby girl." She dropped into the chair beside me, the one that had been Margaret's, the one I had never moved from its spot on the right side of the porch, and pulled her jacket tighter against the December air. We sat and watched the light come up over the east field, slow and gray and patient, the way Carolina winter light always arrives, like it isn't sure it's welcome, but intends to stay anyway. "How's Carol?" she asked. "Running the restaurant division like she was born to it," I said. Which she was. "And Marcus?" "Got a call from Charleston Southern last week. Department chair says he's one of the best students they've had in 5 years. Scholarship committee meets in January." Rebecca smiled into her coffee. We sat with that for a while. The fields stretched out in every direction, brown and resting, storing whatever they would need for the spring. 40 harvests I had watched those fields turn from brown to green and back again. I expected to watch 40 more, and if I didn't, I had made my peace with that too. "I've been thinking," Rebecca said. "About what? About that night. About what I almost let happen." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "I keep coming back to the same thing. I was so focused on making the relationship work that I stopped paying attention to who I was making it work with." "That's an easy thing to do," I said, "especially when you love someone." "Did you ever do it with Mama, I mean?" I thought about that honestly. "Once early on. First year we were married. I was so focused on building the farm into something real that I stopped paying attention to what she needed right in front of me. She told me one evening, direct as anything your mama never did, circle around a point. She said, "Walter, I didn't marry the farm. I married you. Can you please come back?" Rebecca looked at me. "What did you do?" "I put down what I was doing and went and sat with her on this porch for 2 hours," I said. "Didn't talk about the farm once. Just sat with her and listened to whatever she wanted to talk about." I looked out at the fields. "She didn't ask for much, your mama, but what she asked for, she deserved completely." Rebecca nodded. She looked at her mother's chair, the one she was sitting in, and ran her hand along the wooden arm, slowly, the way you touch something that still carries a person's shape. "She would have liked this," she said. "The two of us out here." "She'd have been out here at 4 o'clock, I said, telling us both we were sleeping in. Rebecca laughed, the real one, the one I had been hearing more of these past months, the one that had her mother's particular brightness in it. The sun cleared the tree line. The fields went from gray to gold in the space of a minute, the way they always did, the way they would keep doing long after either of us was here to watch it. I thought about the evening at the 1832 grill, the mud on my boots, the table by the kitchen door, the envelope, the ring, setting itself down on the white linen with almost no sound at all. I thought about what Tyler had said on his way out the door. "I didn't think you'd ever find any of it." I thought about what that said. Not about him, but about the kind of man who builds a life expecting the people around him never to look closely. I had looked closely for 40 years. At the soil, at the contracts, at the people who worked for me, at the woman I married, at the daughter I raised. Attention is not a small thing. It is in the end the primary thing. "Daddy," Rebecca said. "Yeah, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I wasn't." She stopped, started again. "Even when I wasn't being who Mama raised me to be." I looked at my daughter, this woman in her mother's chair, holding a gas station coffee with both hands, watching the morning come up, over 40 years of my life's work. "Rebecca," I said, "you were always who your mama raised you to be. You just needed a hard enough night to remember it." She reached over and took my hand. We sat like that while the sun finished rising and the fields turned gold, and Duke sighed contentedly at our feet. And the farm did what it had always done, held us quietly and without condition, the way good land holds everything that has ever been planted in it. That night I walked out of the 1832 grill with mud still on my boots. But I was not the one who left with my head down. I've thought about it many times since. About what I could have done differently. About the test I put my daughter through when I should have come to her directly, man to man, father to child. If I could go back, I would sit Rebecca down at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and tell her the truth before it cost her a single evening of pain. Don't wait for the perfect moment to protect the people you love. There is no perfect moment. There is only now. I believe God puts certain nights in a man's life not to break him, but to show him what he's made of, and more importantly, who is still standing beside him when the room clears out. Watch how someone speaks about the people who built them. Watch how they treat those who can do nothing for them. That will tell you everything a resume never will. This has been my story. A #Grandpastries moment. I never planned to live a #revenge story. I never wanted to tell, and a lesson in #family revenge that had nothing to do with vengeance and everything to do with truth. If tonight's story moved something in, you leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Your support means more than you know. Thank you for staying until the very end. And a gentle word before we continue: some of the stories ahead contain fictional elements, written purely with the hope of teaching something worth remembering. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what feeds your soul. We'll see you in the next one.